This week on the podcast, we have another awesome interview from the Hudson Valley Ideas Festival, this time with novelist, essayist, and my co-author for The Last Election, Stephen Marche. Moderated by friend of the podcast, Reilly, they discuss the writing process, working with AI, what the future could look like, and much more. Hope you enjoy it.
The questions that AI poses are actually the most profound spiritual questions.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between language and identity? What is the relationship between meaning and what parts of our meaning are actually meaningful? Why can you spot AI work? Because you can.
Welcome to the stage, Mr. Stephen Marche. I really want to talk about the last election,
Sure.
but there's so much. You're so interesting because you write about everything, and I've now gone deep into a lot of your works in preparation for this. So I think we should talk about the last election and your writing process there. I think this talk is formally billed about on the writing process.
Oh, okay.
But I also want to talk about what you learned about American politics.
Sure.
You wrote The Next Civil War, which was very much about fears, nonfiction, but about what you're seeing play out, I think, in America in particular. But also with the last election, you learned about electoral politics and American politics.
I sure did.
There as well.
Mostly through your husband, Zach. But yeah.
I am married to a man who was Andrew Yang's campaign manager.
This is a very interesting interview for the people here because I'm currently being interviewed about a novel by somebody who is the basis for a character
okay, but
in the
you say
book.
that, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, it was just what your husband told me.
Well,
So.
well, okay. If we're gonna do this,
Yeah.
the person there's a character that is loosely based on my husband.
Yes.
And
yeah.
he does have a relationship with somebody.
Well, yeah, several
But
people.
okay.
Yeah.
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 I don't know that any of them really.
No.
were
I mean,
me.
obviously, it's fiction, right? Like, obviously,
I'm
it's
reading
not,
this book. I feel like I'm like an actor who's like watching her husband be an actor, like having sex
Yeah.
with somebody else on screen. Where I was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
babe, how many people were you dating on the campaign?
Well,
None, just me.
I mean, he is a looker.
He is a handsome man.
Yeah. I mean, he's,
Okay, this is not why you guys are here. So, okay, so the book, The Last Election, and,
Right.
and I should call out as well. Again, that's another book you can get in the shop outside.
Yes.
Wonderful book. It is a fictional story about how democracy ends, but it reads very real. Right? It's fiction, we hope, but
Yeah.
it was essentially you and Andrew trying to imagine what would the end of democracy look like. Like, how would it go out in the United States in modern day?
Yeah.
Does that feel like a fair characterization?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a book called The Next Civil War, which had which is also available there, where they were fictional projections of the end of the Republic, based on research. So I interviewed about 200 people, and I also went and met a lot of far-right groups and developed friendships with a lot of people on the extreme right and also people on the extreme left, and sort of went out and saw political polarization at its most extreme, and then wrote this sort of study of what the collapse of America might look like. But I never did politics. I didn't do a chapter on politics.
And you're Canadian, we should
I'm
say.
Canadian, yes. Well, yeah, a Canadian magazine sent me down to cover the 2016 inauguration, and it had a very Fall of Rome vibe, right? It had a very, like, people fighting each other on the street, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out what's actually going on in America, right? And so I wrote this book, but there were chapters on hyperpartisanship and environmental degradation and vertical and horizontal inequality and complementary polarization and all these very abstract concepts sort of given flesh in fiction. But I didn't do one on politics because you couldn't find anyone you could rely on, right?
You're talking about with the next Civil War.
Yeah, with the next Civil War. Like I didn't do what would happen if an election were overturned or if an election were not believed, because I really wanted in the next Civil War only to have models that I could explain. And which some models are stronger than others. Economic models are not worth the paper they're written on. Environmental models are incredibly strong, right? So I put both in with explanations of their strength. But I didn't even bother with politics because when you're a journalist writing about politics, you're basically dealing with two sides who are telling you lies. and you try to triangulate some kind of reality out of how the lies interact, and it just leads to you don't get real information on how it works. And some journalists spend 20 years working networks, working sources to get at reality, but I'm not one of those people, right? So I didn't put that in. And then Andrew came to me and said, "Why don't you do it? Like, why don't I tell you how American politics works, and we'll write a book about what it would look like, the missing politics from the next Civil War."
That missing chapter,
Yeah,
we could write
we could do
about
that, yeah.
how the system fails, essentially.
Yeah, how the system
And you had
fails.
this interesting dynamic because you had somebody who got to see it from the inside, who ran for president, who really got a sense of the system, but then didn't stay in it entirely. I mean,
Yeah.
Andrew still does certain political work, but he's not a political.
Well, he decided
doesn't run
to.
for- he's not
He
in office.
basically decided. I mean, when he came to me with this idea, I said to him, like, there are two things that I need. One is I need to be told the truth, and I need, whenever I call you, you need to answer, because he's an important guy running around doing important things. But I can't wait for a week for an answer if I'm writing something, right? And so he agreed to that. And I said, you can cut, your name's on the book as much as mine is, so you can cut whatever you want after the fact, but I need to know the truth. And that way I figured whatever happened, I would at least know. I would at least learn how American politics worked, right? And he only ended up cutting one thing, which was actually a reference to Katy Perry. That was the only thing he had.
Protect Katy.
He was like, look, I'm kind of friends with Katy Perry, and I was like, fine, we can get rid of the Katy Perry line. But it wasn't just him. So it was an extensive interview with him, but it was also with Zach, like his right-hand guy. It was also with opposition researchers. It was also with
Hefner.
It was also with the drama. Like, there's a guy whose job is to teach politicians how to act like human beings around people. You think I'm making it up? He's like, you met him.
I know Michael well, yeah.
He's like an ex-Broadway actor, and he gives them jobs like you say something and then you put a piece of Lego on top of another piece of Lego, or you throw a wiffle ball and catch it before you respond, and they do all these like exercises. Like, I just found it was an education in the minutiae of campaign life, from the point of view of everyone on staff, and that was just an extraordinary education in how it worked. Yeah.
So maybe I would love to hear what stood out to you the most. Obviously, you had that. What were other moments where you're like, this is how American electoral politics work?
Well, I mean, the big ones, like, I'd been writing The Next Civil War. It was not an optimistic book, going out there and spending time with like far-right people in Oklahoma and Idaho, right? And so I knew that there were problems in America, right? But then, like, 5 minutes chat with an opposition researcher, you're just like, oh my God, this is in so much trouble. I mean, I'll give you I was talking with Zach and Andrew, and they kept, like, we were talking about because we're just talking about how to structure the book, and like there was going to be a scandal and they're going to use it, and like, so how are we going to do this? And I was like, and they kept using the phrase, well, you'd wait until that moment to unload the book on the guy, or you'd hope that they would unload the book on you there. And at a certain point I was like, hold on a minute, when you say unload the book, is there an actual book? And they were like, oh yeah.
Like an opposition book.
And I was
like,
what do you
research.
mean there's a book? And he was like, oh, there's a book on every politician in America. And I was like, can I see one of these books? And they were like, well, yes and no. Like, we'll get you one somehow, because it's illegal to spread them. Anyway, I got my hands on one of these books, and it was everything bad this person had ever done. But not bad would be the wrong word. It would be like,
anything that could be spun to be bad.
there was literally a page that was, he dated a female bodybuilder in high school. Can we do anything with this? There was a page that was like, there was every real estate transaction, needless to say, every tweet that could be spun every way. But it was anyone he'd ever sat down next to at a table that was anti-Semitic, right? At a gala or whatever. Like, and I was like, who could survive this? Right. Like, if they ran a book on me, or anyone in this room,
Right.
like what would it look like? It would look like, it would look like a human life, right? Which is full of failings, right? And that was when I was like, what? Like, who is doing this?
Yeah.
Like, who could survive this particular kind of nastiness?
Yeah.
Right. That one stuck out to me a lot. You know. Also, like when I asked Andrew, like, what are the 3 most important days in a campaign, and his answer was first fundraising report, second fundraising report, third fundraising report, and I realized, like, I mean, what I learned is that it's just money. I mean, it's literally just money. Like it's getting money it's getting attention to get money so that you can get more attention so you get more money. That is the job of a politician in the United States.
Yes.
And when that is your job, it really doesn't matter if you're a good person or a bad person.
Are you a short guy? Do you have a short guy in your life? In 2013, I mentored a couple of young entrepreneurs, Eric and Stephen, who are short guys themselves, and they started Ash and Erie to help short guys find clothes that fit right out of the box. Pants, shirts, athletic wear, you name it. If you are 5'8" or shorter and have had this problem, Ash and Erie is the brand for you. Go to ashanderie.com, check out their clothes, and you can use discount code YANG for 20% off your first order. You're going to thank me, or your friend is going to thank me. You're going to thank yourself. If you are a guy 5'8" or shorter and have had trouble buying clothes, your troubles are now over at ashanderie.com. Discount code YANG.
So, but one of the things that stuck out to me watching the process unfold as an outsider coming into it was the traits that you have to optimize for as a candidate are very different than the traits that I feel I want in somebody who's running government.
Yeah.
And that was something that I think Andrew had realized was like, Andrew is actually a very problem solving kind of a guy. He's incredibly action oriented. He's like, all right, here's the data. Let's go try and do something about this. And being a candidate is not actually about that at all. It's about getting in front of the media, having the right message, having the right talking points, having the right 3 sentences to say in front of a camera.
Yeah.
Or to the donor, to the bundler, because all you're optimizing for is raising money and having sound bites.
Well,
and that's not at all what I would actually want in people who are running the government.
Well, exactly. But I mean, I think the thing that was really interesting about Andrew and why he was such a perfect person to co-write this book with is because that problem-solving mentality meant that he looked at campaigning as a series of machines.
Yeah.
Right? Like as a series of machines to be solved.
And like milestones.
Yeah,
and
this is a machine that you unfold this way and then you get, and so he knew how they all worked. Like he took that problem-solving mentality to the system. I mean, it didn't, like, it's not like that allowed him to manipulate the system perfectly, but on the other hand, it gave him very clear views of exactly how these systems work in a very, almost, how to put it, like a cold-blooded way.
Yeah.
Like just like with a certain measure of distance. Like he was talking about how you'd cook a meal or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Here are the procedural steps for this thing.
How you'd fix, the bumper of your car is broken. What are the steps that you take to fix it? Like that kind of approach, which made it perfect for this kind of book.
So I mean, aside from who's represented in this book or not, I really recommend it. I think it's so interesting because we spoke before and I said, I think I referenced that parts of it were hyperbolic, and you were like, I didn't think I was really being hyperbolic. Like I was reporting essentially what I was being told.
Yeah.
But what I would say is you bring a writer's touch to the situation, because you have this thing you say, okay, there's this guy who teaches politicians how to seem more human.
Yeah.
That was not how we phrased it on the campaign. Like, needless
But
to say,
that's what I was told.
We weren't like, really? Is that what they said?
That is
to you
exactly what they
specifically?
told me. That's what he
Never
told
mind
me.
then.
That's
I
what
was going to say, I feel like you put a writer's flair to these, you hold up this mirror to the experience in a way where maybe I was young enough that it was able to normalize it so much, but then I see it written the way you write it, and you're a very talented writer, so it's a really good book, and you're gripped by it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like, I lived parts of this, and yet I read it, and I think this is really crazy.
Well, it's a political thriller.
Yes.
Right, like it
again,
obviously is a piece of genre fiction.
Yeah.
But I mean, I really felt like I wanted to have the sequences work so that it was driving. right?
Yeah.
So that you would not be able to put it down.
Yes.
For sure, that was 100% the writer task. But then everything else, I wanted just to be clear.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I don't think you need to exaggerate anything. I mean, the guy is an ex-Broadway actor.
Yeah.
He's coming and giving them basically acting lessons, but they're not even acting lessons. They're like how to be a human being lessons in front of other human beings.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Like, what are you going to add?
Well,
you don't need to put any.
I don't think we had a selfie consultant.
You don't need to put whipped cream on top of that.
That's fair.
They absolutely had a selfie consultant. I talked to that person. Yeah.
Wait. I worked on this campaign. I knew a lot of what was
Look,
going on. There was a selfie consultant?
Well, no, there was a person that they hired for the line.
Okay. See, this is what I'm saying, though.
Okay, so it wasn't a selfie consultant. It was the selfie line consultant.
Okay, I think it was something you phrased very well in the book.
You see normalization? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, it's so normal. No,
Yeah.
but you make this point very well in the book, which is that selfies are like the new handshake.
Yeah.
Like in a different era of American politics, what we think about, it's like, you shake the hand, you kiss the baby, and now it's really about like, make sure other people get selfies with you, the candidate, because they're going to put it online. They have followers.
Yeah, what is the number? It's like 800
500,
impressions.
I think.
Right, 500 impressions per selfie. So to make that manageable, you need to get it under 40 seconds?
Yeah.
So there's a consultant on how to get it under 40 seconds.
Yeah. Well, no.
You see what I'm talking about? Like,
you have somebody who, and I did this sometimes, right? You after an event, after a rally, Andrew is taking selfies with photos.
Right.
I think it's the average person has 500 followers. So if that selfie goes online, they post it online, that's 500 people who are going to see them with this candidate. You're getting the candidate's name out there.
Yeah.
And if you're the person who's taking selfies for people, or not just selfies, but taking photos for somebody with the candidate,
yes,
you do want to move things along.
Yeah, but it's very fraught, because the last thing that they need to feel, they definitely don't want to feel that they've been hurried.
No, correct, and that is the challenge.
If you hurry them along,
right?
If you say, "Hey, let's move," that's the very worst thing you can do.
Well, and you definitely don't want the candidate doing that.
Yeah.
That's why you want somebody like me who's there who's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, but you've got to move, because
Right.
Andrew has to seem like he is actually genuinely interested in people.
Yeah, see, you'd
all
be
the things
amazing
of it.
at that, wouldn't you?
I was quite good.
Yeah, right.
I got the lines moving along very well.
Right, I'm sure.
So I'm curious how long it took you, in general, how long does it take you to write a book? Is it always the same? Does it vary dramatically in terms of the book you're writing?
It varies pretty dramatically. I mean, I published 3 books last year, including the one.
Oh my gosh, you published 3?
Yeah, so during COVID, I prayed to God to work me to death, and because I didn't have any work and he's like taking me up on it. He's like, you want to see what it's like? Let's do it.
3 books.
Yeah.
So I feel bad now that what were the 3?
I wrote a small book for a Canadian publisher called On Writing and Failure.
So I did read that.
Yeah,
Not the whole thing.
And then I
really
co-wrote a book with AI for Pushkin Industries called Death of an Author, which was the first AI-generated novel reviewed in the New York Times, which will probably be on my tombstone. And then the book with Andrew.
Wow.
So yeah.
So how long did each take?
Well, the AI one was particular because we signed the contract in February and they needed it in May.
Wait. You
they
sent
published
it in February,
it,
March, April. So 3
and
months.
they published it in May. Yeah, it was frantic. I mean, it was frantic. Like my kids didn't see me. It was like I was tucked into a different world. Meanwhile, I was doing proofs on Andrew's book. At the same time. So I was working. I was right at the limit of what my brain could do, and it kind of broke me. Like at the end of May, I was,
You were part
I went
AI.
I went to my mother's house in the mountains and just basically lay on the floor for a month. But honestly, it was not super healthy.
Hey all, if you know me, you know I'm not that handy in the kitchen, and I have become a huge believer and booster of Factor. Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals make eating a joy. It's so fast, you just pop that thing 2 minutes later, and you are eating a restaurant-quality, healthy meal, making you feel excellent about yourself. My favorite is the turkey chili with zucchini, and there is so much more to choose from. You never get tired of it. It fits any budget. It's fast, healthy. It is going to be the new Factor in your life. Yes, I'm a fan. Head to factormeals.com/yang50 and use code yang50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. That's code yang50 at factormeals.com/yang50 to get 50% off your first box. Get Factor today. It's going to change the way you eat.
So I on writing fail. I read this one, but this was the same with Coleman. I couldn't remember the title. I read the book, but then
On Writing and Failure.
On Writing and Failure,
Yeah.
which I really enjoyed. Anybody who I think is doing who does anything creative, I think can find value in that and talking about, most of a creative person's life is actually failures, but what everyone
Yeah.
else sees are just the moments of success, I suppose.
Right.
But let me ask you. So the AI book, was that fictional? Because
it was
I
a
know
novel.
actually less about that. So that was a novel
Yeah.
you wrote with AI. So
Correct.
talk about that process.
Back in 2012, I wrote a piece called Against Digital Humanities for the LA Review of Books, and it caused a lot of controversy, and there was a big to-do about it and a fuss. And because of that, people would send me information like, hey, you're wrong. Here's very interesting things happening with technology and writing. And 95% of them were terrible.
So you wrote an article that was critical?
Critical,
Like,
yeah.
There's
nothing here.
There's nothing here. Okay.
And 95% of them, and people would write me like, no, they found some. And then finally someone sent me one where it was like, oh, wait a minute. This is actually pretty interesting what they're doing with these language machines. And
Sorry, tell me what year we're in.
that would have been like 2016.
Okay.
And then in 2017, I wrote an algorithmically generated story for Wired, which was like probably the first computer-generated piece of fiction. And then because of that, other tech people would sort of send me. I got early access to things. And I worked with a large language model company in Toronto called Cohere, which is a great company, and they were like, one of the co-CEOs is in a band and is a very cool guy and wants to make art, and so we like collaborated on various things together. Like we did Shakespeare analysis using Cohere's models, which got published in the Times, and we were doing some interesting stuff on AI. And then Pushkin came to me and said, like, okay, do you want to do a full novel?
And so, are you prompting it to write things and then you layer onto it? Like, what does the actual collaborative process between you and an AI look like?
So for Wired, I actually had a computer scientist and a digital humanist build me an engine, which is
Like a custom, like this is
like
a
a custom
built to be able to write about.
yeah,
X, Y,
literally
Z.
called Sci-Fi Q, that was able to write. Now, it was not a prompting engine. It was a style guide, so that it would take text that and rearrange it to fit certain patterns that I'd drawn out of a collection of short fiction that we'd built this comparative statistical analysis with. This was the equivalent of a soapbox derby racer, and ChatGPT is a nuclear submarine.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking like very primitive early models here.
So to see if I understand this,
Yeah.
what was that about? What was that Wired article about? Or that
It was-
Wired
the
fictional
Wired
story?
story was called Twinkle Twinkle, and it was about scientists on Earth watching events unfold on a planet several million miles away, helplessly watching history happen on this island,
Okay.
on this distant planet.
So this model was built bespoke
Bespoke for me.
to have certain. It ingested a lot of a certain
Yes.
kind of writing style.
Yes.
And it ingested a bunch of information about planets and the stars or whatever.
It literally took 50 of my favorite science fiction short stories
Okay.
and compared them to all other short stories, and then compared that to language in general.
Wow.
And came up with a model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then at that point, you said it wasn't a prompt. You didn't prompt it then at that point.
No.
So
Literally,
then-
they built me an interface.
Wow.
Right. So like
So once it had ingested all that, it's just spit some.
No, it would. What would require is me to put writing in, and that would say,
Okay.
this doesn't fit, and
I
then
get it.
I would fix it, and there would literally be a bunch of green lights on the side.
I get it.
Which would turn green
Wow.
on all of it.
So you would write
Yeah.
something, then it would be like, no, this doesn't fit the style
Yeah.
you're looking for.
It was horrible.
Red.
It was like trying to do a Rubik's cube
Okay.
with like one piece constantly missing. Like it took a lot of fiddling to
Okay.
get right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and so great. That helps clarify that. And
Yeah.
now you fast forward to writing this entire book.
Yeah.
Was that prompt oriented
Yes.
or okay?
That was based on GPT 3.5,
Yep.
which I actually is my favorite model I've ever used. I think it's better. I
Than
think it's
4? Better than 4?
I mean, for what I was doing, for sure, it
Interesting.
was. It was before a lot of the rough edges were taken off language in the GPT model, and so I would put in very, very specific lexical and syntactical instructions and like large, like just if you ever used a visual prompt, like the more detail you put into the prompt, the better the result.
Yeah.
And it was exactly the same thing. Then I would take that and I would put it in pseudo-write, which is a stochastic writing instrument, and then that allowed you, that had a customized button where you could take a text and say, make it sound like Ernest Hemingway, and it would do that. And if I did that and folded over, like I would say, make it sound like Ernest Hemingway, make it sound like Chinese nature poetry, make it sound like hard-boiled fiction, at the end you would get something interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so
And then also, one last bit.
Yeah.
I also use Cohere. They built me a special engine. See, the thing is, I had access to engineers.
yes,
That's,
I'm sensing that.
you know, the starting salary of a Stanford PhD machine learning engineer is $2 million a year, right? So to get access to them to actually help you build things, you need like a unicorn, right? You need like the guy that I knew at Cohere who was like really into this weird stuff, right? So they built me a model where I would make a specific request, like write a metaphor about coffee, and then I would train it on dozens of examples of metaphors of coffee, and then it would just regenerate metaphors until I got, and that's how because I always feel like in hard-boiled fiction, there's like, you know, the good prose, and then there's like really great lines. Like there's a line in Raymond Chandler that's like, it was a blonde to make a bishop kick a hole through a stained glass window. I wanted lines like that.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't really get that out of ChatGPT. I wanted, and that,
Yes.
and that's how I got Cohere to like
To
build
build
those lines.
that.
But obviously that's much more labor, it's
And
too
at a
labor
certain
intensive to
point-
write a book that way.
Well, right, and also
Yeah.
like at a certain point, finding all of the examples to train it on is actually more work than you coming up with the metaphor yourself as
Oh,
a writer who could have fully just come up with the metaphor in a second.
Way more work.
Yes.
Plus, you have to deal with it very. You know, some of these models, like one of the original short stories. I mean, they didn't tell me at the time, but they told me later. Like I wrote a short story called Auto-Tuned Love Story, where every sentence was based on a different writer, and I trained them all on the corpuses of every writer. And you know, each of those models cost the company like $1,800 strictly in power costs.
Yeah, just the compute
Right,
costs.
just in
Yeah.
in electricity.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's EXPRESS VPN.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more.
The last question that I feel like I'm required to ask
Yeah.
before we throw it to the audience when talking about these kinds of things, you're in an interesting position as being an author, obviously, and a writer. That's what you do by profession. You're obviously clearly a technologist who's familiar with these technologies, who's training this tech on other writers' works.
Yes.
What do you make of the debate and the conflict that's happening right now between creatives who feel like their work is being, the copyrights are being infringed upon by these models,
Right.
and their ownership over their own work, and then the AI models learning from it?
Well, I mean, you know, it is a very specific. I actually think it's a misunderstanding of artificial intelligence. Like, it does consume work, but it consumes it the way, like, it would be like me eating a book,
Yeah.
Like, am I stealing a book when I eat it and when it comes out?
Or
Like,
you read other books and then are inspired by them and generate
yes.
something.
You know, it's interesting because there's nowhere near the stigma about like a writer in Japan just won the Akugatawa Prize, which is like the Pulitzer Prize of Japan, for a book that's 5% AI generated. Nobody cares. Right. And Chinese science fiction writers have been using artificial intelligence to flesh out parts of their books for years. Nobody cares. Right. So it's actually the hatred of AI is a very specific cultural phenomenon related to a very specifically Western idea of originality and authenticity that I understand and I think is noble, but that is very localized.
Well, I think IP protection is something that has actually done a lot for America.
Listen, no one is allowed
protection.
to take my work without paying me.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying like and that goes for that goes for these models too. Like they need to pay for it. But I also don't think people really understand that for these artificial intelligence models, like what they're really drawn on is things like emails. Right? Like W.B. Yeats sailing to Byzantium for a large language model is no different than your last email. Well, it's just meaning.
With the caveat, perhaps, and tell me if you disagree, that if I say, hey, write me a book like Stephen Marche,
yeah,
that's no
Although
longer
in
just
my
write me
case, that would be really weird because I don't know what the hell it would come up with.
It might be interesting. You might learn something about your own brand. You're like, oh, that's
what
who
I don't
am
have.
as a
I mean,
writer.
no, I as you say, I write weird things that have no connection with each other, which is why I have no brand. But yes, I guess that's true in a way. But on the other hand, like when I wrote The Next Civil War, like I literally read Cormac McCarthy every morning before I started writing it. I was like, I'm going to write a book as if I were Cormac McCarthy.
And I think that's
and
more
then the New York Times
maybe...
said it's like a book Cormac McCarthy would write. I was like, done. Right? Like
job complete.
Job complete,
Which is why I think that's probably more accurate than eating the book, because obviously.
Yeah. Well, I think there were people who showed me things like they typed in what are the chances of there being a civil war in the United States, and the opening page of my book, what came out of ChatGPT, right?
The verbatim.
Yeah, verbatim. And I was like, that's not right.
Yeah.
that's I need to get paid for that.
Yeah.
Right. And there are other similar problems to that.
Yeah.
I certainly think writers need to get paid when their work is used.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
Right. But like on the other hand, I think people who worry about that are kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
I think larger things are at stake. They're going to fix that one.
Right.
Right. Like that's a fixable problem.
We may all be useless, or we're killed in search of making a million paper clips or whatever that analogy is.
Yeah.
Like, those are the bigger existential issues.
Or what does it mean that a machine can make meaning?
Yeah.
Right. What does
I
that
don't even understand
like? What does that
question.
mean?
Yeah.
Right. Like I think the questions that AI poses are actually the most profound spiritual questions.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between language and identity? What is the relationship between meaning and like what parts of our meaning are actually meaningful? Why can you spot AI work? Because you can. But they're so. I think people who worry about like jobs and stuff like that, it's like that's really not the problem. There are there'll be jobs that'll be created and some will be destroyed. Like
I think it is a problem, but it's
but it's the same problem as all the other
any other technological advancement.
And capitalism.
Sure.
Right. It's not specific to AI, but the questions that AI asks are really the deepest questions. Right. And I think that's why I think why it's so fascinating. Right. Like I just find it endlessly fascinating.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. I've always been a sleep guy. I believe that if you sleep better, then your day goes better. And Helix Sleep has been an awesome partner and sponsor to this podcast because I actually love the heck out of their product. I took their personalized Helix Sleep quiz and was matched with a Dawn Firm mattress because I wanted something that supported me and I sleep on my back. So if you don't know how you sleep, you can just make answers up on the Helix Sleep quiz. They won't even know that you made it up, and then they'll send you a mattress to your door that you'll have a 100-day free trial yeah, you can have it for 3 months and send it back, but you won't want to send it back because you're going to love it. You're going to sleep better. Our Helix Sleep mattress is my kid's favorite mattress, even though they did not take the quiz. They just get on that thing and say, you know what? This mattress is the best one in the house. Don't take my word for it. It's a top pick from GQ and Wired magazine. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. That's helixsleep.com/yang. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now. Get a new mattress for the fall. Yeah.
Well, speaking of questions, we're opening it up to y'all's questions. There's somebody right here.
I do memoirs for a company that markets memoir work. I go straight.
Really?
Yes. And when I first started with them, it was an interviewing and writing process that I was completely familiar with.
Right.
Then they injected AI into generating the outline and generating the first draft.
Yeah.
And they also cut our fee considerably when they started doing that, which I may be a little resentful of, but I shouldn't be because it's a lot of typing I theoretically don't have to do, right? However, the AI drafts kind of suck.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they neuter the writer's voice. They come up with this kind of Perils of Pauline kind of tone.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering, can you give me any idea how to work with it better? I don't want to resent it. I don't want to be angry with it. I want to get the benefit of it that I should be getting so that I can keep this as a viable gig, if you see what I'm saying.
Well, here's what I think. AI to me is the microwave of language. Right? Like it is what you like if you want to heat up a cup of coffee or a frozen pizza, you use AI. But do people want to eat frozen pizza and rewarmed coffee? You know, not to say that there's not uses for it, right? Not like obviously, like I'm in favor of AI, but like I think figuring out what parts of this process are AI is useful for and which parts it's not, that's going to be a process. And I think that's happening across. I mean, I find your example actually super fascinating. Do you do this like mass memoirs for families? Like, is that what they are?
Individuals, actually, I tend to
Like-
get the assignments that are like what not to say to your friend with a cancer diagnosis, or you know, it's
a publishing
custom
company.
publishing. Yes.
It's custom publishing.
Yes.
Right.
It's
Okay.
bespoke. And
Bespoke publishing.
Most of it's more or less vanity work.
Right.
And those people really want what they want. And I could give it to them as a writer. With the AI in the way, I feel like it's more work to try and reinsert their
Right.
tone than it would be to just do the darn thing.
I mean, I guess the like practical advice would be to train it on more data, like train it on more like on the most information you get, and also of course like to make the prompt as specific as possible. Like write this in the style of XYZ, and you know if you fiddle around, you can probably find some prompt that'll get you somewhere towards to be better if you make it richer. Like even adding words like write elegantly can do that. I mean, I know that sounds insane, but like that's what I've found. But ultimately, like if people want a human sounding language, they're going to need to pay you to write it, right? I don't think that's like I think my microwave analogy is actually pretty accurate here, right? Like there are certain, like if you're writing a letter of recommendation for somebody or something like that, or like filling out some bizarre form or something, like AI is tremendous.
A cover letter.
A cover letter or whatever. Like I'm never going to write a letter of recommendation myself ever again. Click, right? Like it works and it's actually better than what I can do. But if you want, and I assume for some aspects of vanity publishing, that's actually probably just as good. But there's certainly going to be aspects where it's not. And I think, and I think figuring that out, like there are a lot of business people out there who think that they're going to automate out a lot of creativity. And I mean, as someone who has used it, I think on the edge of what could be done with it at a certain point, there's chunks that just are not. That just cannot be automated out. I mean, I think that's becoming clearer all the time.
Okay, right here.
I'm wondering if you think, because I've heard kind of both sides of this argument of like, at least when it comes to ChatGPT and even I guess like Bing and Google Gemini and all these things, like you got people saying, oh, this is the dumbest it'll ever be, or because it's only improving over time. And then on the other side of that, there's kind of this argument that it's being neutered and fine-tuned to the point where everything just kind of becomes homogenous and lifeless and lacking that creativity. I'm wondering which side, I guess,
That's a good question.
But both are true, right? And that's one of the things that when you realize what this is, which is a statistically matching pattern, statistic pattern matching system with human learning feedback, both of these things are true. So AI, the more data you put into it, the more accurate it gets. But that's not the same thing as smarter, right? Like it means that it can do more tasks. Like it's very interesting in doing math now in a way that it could not do. And some of the earlier models had really, really bizarre capabilities that nobody understood, like being able to translate into languages that they'd never been trained on and stuff like that. And a lot of those surprises are starting to diminish. But like, what ChatGPT is a reflection of the and what I think it's driving towards is not super intelligence or some kind of like, something transhuman, but actually the most banal expression of human intelligence that you can get, right? Like, so that's why writing letters, cover letters, it's so perfect at. Because that's the more banal the speech, the better AI is at replicating it, right? And that's why student essays, it's perfect at. You're asking it to replicate a really banal thing. So it's good at it, and it's getting much better at that, and much more accurate at it. But that's not the same thing as getting smarter, right? Or getting beyond human intelligence.
Exceptional or
exactly, right? Like it's good at doing really standard things, and so I don't see it getting better at creative stuff at all. Right? I mean, from my own experience using it, I mean, it's what it does is right now is truly incredible. But to really get the creative effects, especially the ones that I'm talking about, which are, let's face it, avant-garde and experimental, like you need an engineer, right? You need someone.
Creative mind, I think, even if, which I guess is kind of the same thing, but.
Well, I mean, I think AI is, creative AI to me is kind of stalled right now because the people who are doing it are ultimately weirdos like me who come out of like tiny little cultural, like writers, right? Or artists or stuff like that. The person who's going to make creative AI a reality is going to need to have a combination of financial, technological, and creative genius, right? They're going to need to be a Disney-like figure, right? Where they're capable of incorporating those three things because
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, like a Steve Jobs at Pixar type person, where you're able to understand creative realities, you're able to understand technological development, but you're also able to, it's a capital intensive business, artificial intelligence. So that combination of attributes is actually quite rare. Like, and also like because I'm sort of in these worlds, like the engineers, they're great guys. I love working with them, but like, ultimately their linguistic references begin and end with Lord of the Rings, right? And like I'm talking geniuses, right? I'm talking like very, very brilliant people. Yeah, and then similarly, you've got writers who are like, why aren't I being paid? Like I should be paid $5.50 for for access to my, like completely missing the point, right? Like completely missing the stakes of what are at play, just as all the writers did with Google Books and every other technological revolution that changed us. And so, finding that fit and finding that, and also I should point out, there are no institutions to support this work. Like you can't go and find, like you can't, if you have a creative AI idea, you have to make it yourself and put it on Twitter, basically. Right? Like it is not there's no granting institutions, there's no homes for it. So it's stalled, I think, is the truth. And getting it out of stalling is going to require someone a lot tougher and more practical human being than me.
Awesome, Stephen Marche, everyone.